Is that core to Sweet Dream?
That was kind of the spark of the idea. I have a saying that my team has heard a million times, all the answers are in the restaurants.
When did you eventually end up opening?
And we thought at the time we probably needed like $100,000. Lo and behold, it was gonna cost a lot more.
How you fundraised?
We had to talk to a lot of people, a lot of no's. I remember going to banks early and the banks are like, absolutely not. Like, are you out of your mind? Like, that was a hell no.
What ended up working?
Call your heroes, get advice, going to people and being really open to feedback.
And what goes through your head of this is good, this is bad, what really matters and what doesn't?
You look at a really successful entrepreneur and you're like, oh, I want that. But you want the whole life? You have to be willing to trade the whole thing.
The Yesterday podcast is brought to you by Ro, the all-in-one banking platform for startups. Thousands of companies use Ro. You get everything you need to manage your startup's cash. Fast banking setup, cards with up to 2% cashback, and yield that turns your company cash into extra runway. All super useful in the early days of launching. But the thing founders really love about Ro is their team. Candidly, they were amazing to partner with us on. They're about 3 hours ahead of my time zone. I don't think they ever took over 10 minutes to respond back to a text or email of mine. They're obsessed with helping founders beat industry giants, and will go to the end of the earth to help them do so. Exclusively for Yesterday Pod listeners and viewers, you'll get a $1,500 statement credit and tons of exclusive perks when you manage your company cash with Ro. Terms and conditions apply. To learn more, visit ro.co/yesterday. That's rho.co/yesterday. Ro's a fintech, not a bank. Checking and card services provided by Webster Bank. Member FDIC. See rewards terms for details. Well, sweet. Pleasure to have you, Jonathan.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much. It would be fun if you could give a bit of a TLDR of your life story in your own words. Who you are, where did you grow up, and your story until today.
Absolutely. So my parents immigrated here from Iran. We're Persian Jews, and they left during the revolution. So that had a huge imprint on my life as they had to leave the place where they had grown up and built their whole life and kind of leave it all and come to America. So for me, this idea of the American dream was always something, kind of magical that I've always aspired to and saw my family who got that second chance here in America. So they came here in 1979, like many others in their community that had to flee due to religious persecution and everything that was going on. Came and ended up in Los Angeles. I was born 5 years later. And I grew up in Los Angeles, and I'm the oldest of four boys, so I have 3 younger brothers. And I think growing up, I always was attracted to business and being an entrepreneur and this idea of creating something. Watching my dad and his brothers start a business from scratch was always very inspiring for me.
What did they start?
They were in textile,
Yeah.
so they would import, export textile fabrics, and then eventually got into some other businesses. But it was amazing because they were successful in Iran, but had to come here and start over from scratch. Yeah. So from a very young age, I would see the hustle and the grind of what it takes to create a business. I remember going to the office with him on weekends. I remember, early memories of like putting a suit on because I'd see my dad put a suit on and going to the factory with him in the warehouse and driving around the little forklifts and all those experiences that were very formative for me.
What do your siblings do now? And kind of like, what was your relationship when you were a kid with them? What was it like growing up around your family? I feel like there's a lot of immigrant culture and there's a lot of values that are built in there.
For sure. So we grew up with a very tight-knit community. Both my family, my immediate family, my dad and my parents, their brothers and sisters and their kids, we all grew up very, very close. So one of the rules I remember my dad had from a very early age was around Shabbat. And my dad was pretty cool with me doing a lot of things, but he had one rule. He's like, you are always coming to Shabbat. And at the time, that was very frustrating, especially when I got into high school and I was, homecoming, football games, all those sorts of things. But in retrospect, it was that anchor for our family. It was not really a religious event for us. It was a cultural thing of just every Friday we get together as a family and break bread. And it was the whole family. So I have 20 first cousins on my dad's side. And
they're all in LA.
And they're all in LA. We all live nearby. Many are entrepreneurs today. Some are very, have done really, really well as well. It was amazing because it created these incredible bonds as a family. Many of my cousins are still my best friends. My brothers and I are very close. I my brothers, one's 3 years younger, one's 4 years younger, and one's 11 years younger than me, but we're all incredibly close. Each of my brothers have worked here at some point at Sweetgreen.
Really?
Yeah.
What do they do?
One of them helped on real estate development, one was helping on construction. This is right when they were in college or right after college. And now the three of them actually work together. They do really interesting, creative real estate development.
Interesting. In LA? Or?
In LA, mostly focused in LA.
What's what's one of the...
So they, very focused in Silver Lake for the most part, and so they've bought a lot of historic and old properties and rehabbed them, brought in cool creative retail and built some ground up apartments and really trying to redevelop that area and
That's sweet.
just create community in that neighborhood. The company's called Ryda. My brothers are Ryan and Daniel, so Ryda.
Huh.
And
RYDA.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Huh.
But yeah, overall had a great childhood. I went to public school here in LA. I remember growing up reading biographies of other successful people, other business leaders, and always, dreaming of wanting to do that. And I was always attracted to this idea of innovation and the power of like setting your mind to something and going and accomplishing that thing.
Who did you look up to? What did you read about?
I remember just like reading about like as a kid, like Nike and
you read Shoe Dog?
Yeah, well, recently Shoe Dog,
Yeah.
but I remember even back then it was companies like Nike, it was companies like Disney, it was companies like Apple that I was just like these iconic brands. And this was even before Apple, as we know it today. It was Apple V1. But a lot of these companies were companies that really inspired me as a kid. And so from a very young age, I think I knew I wanted to go into business. Getting into restaurants is not something I ever considered at all. I loved food, but it was more, the opportunity that we saw that got me into food. But before I get there, for me, as I was making the decision of where to go to school, part of it is I knew I wanted to study business because I knew I wanted to do that, and I knew I wanted to get out of kind of this bubble I was living in, and I wanted to get far away, experience a different culture, get to the East Coast.
Where were you living in LA? Just as a kid.
I was born kind of in Santa Monica, West LA, ended up going to Beverly High and growing up in Beverly Hills.
I guess before we touch on Georgetown, talk about like your high school time. What were you doing? Where did you spend your time? And then kind of this through line of the Shabbats is crucial as well. But talk about your high school days.
Yeah, in high school, I did a lot. I was very active. Both, I played sports. I played a lot of different sports.
What'd you play?
So I played basketball a little bit. I even played football. I ended up doing volleyball and then track and cross country. I was also involved in student government. So I was involved in student government for probably I think 3 out of the 4 years. Ended up being student class president and really got into the leadership side. I also got from a very young age was very interested in entrepreneurship. So was always starting freshman year in high school, I was, would always have a summer job or an internship, just exploring different curiosities. I'd started, little businesses when I was younger. I remember, I think right around high school or maybe a little bit before, tutoring other kids or, coaching kids and figuring out, I would charge, I don't know, $20 an hour or something. And then I realized that, well, I was charging $20 an hour per kid, but if I could get 4 kids, I could make $80 an hour. And so I'd figure out how to coach 4 kids at a time and how I could scale that. Another formidable experience for me in high school was I started something called the Young Entrepreneurs Club.
It was like a high school club?
It was a high school club, and originally started with, hey, let's just create a club to talk about entrepreneurship, bring in guest speakers and all the sorts. And then we decided, well, let's, instead of talking about entrepreneurship, let's just try starting a business. So
What year were you?
this was a sophomore year. So the business we decided to start was, this is going back in more of the analog days, but if you remember, we used to have these planners. I don't know if they still have those today. The paper
books.
planners,
Yeah,
with the spiral notebook.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
many schools we knew had these planners, and they were kind of part of the school. Everyone had the branded planner. Our school didn't have it. So we had this idea, which was we were going to source the planner, we were going to sell it at cost so we could get a lot of distribution, but then we were going to go to local businesses and sell ads in the planners. And it worked really well. We ended up selling, at the time it felt like a lot of money. I think it was like $30,000 a year.
Wow. How many of you was it? It was just a whole
It was
club?
just 3 of us. And so we ran it for a few years. The time we were there, after we left, the school ended up actually taking it over, and they still sell the notebooks, but without the ads.
Why were you selling ads as a kid? I guess in high school at that point you're 16, I guess. Where do you get the idea to sell ads? I think that's like a relatively smart business model. I don't know, that's interesting.
You know, we just thought we had eyeballs. You know, we had eyeballs, and we were like, okay, well, the back page of this, you have, you know, it was a relatively big high school. It was like, I think like almost 3,000 kids. Like we have 3,000 kids and all these local businesses, and we could sell ad units on the back page. We could sell ad units on every corner. We could sell ad pages in like the front of it, and so we just started hustling. And I think I learned an early lesson around the hustle.
Does Sweetgreen sponsor any core people right now, or any brands or anything? Is that core to Sweetgreen?
We do. We do partner with creators and podcasts. We do a lot of that stuff today. But it was a really fun experience, kind of starting that first business. But it was interesting because we started it as part of a school, so we didn't actually own the business, and learned a lot of the challenges of working with, call it, regulation. Most clubs never, the most they would make was like hundreds of dollars. Yeah. And so the deal with the club was like you'd pay 20%. Well, we made a lot of money. And then at the end they're like, we're taking this. And so there was a big fight over that.
Did you get the money?
No, we didn't get the money. We didn't get the money at the end. We did something cool at the time. There was a government matching program around scholarships. So we were able to put the money into a fund, had the government match it, and we were able to give scholarships to kind of future aspiring entrepreneurs. So it was a really cool experience around starting a business from scratch that is really imprinted on me, and just again fortified this idea of wanting to work for myself and create something.
What did your close friends do? Who were your close friends, and are you still close to them?
I'm very lucky. I'm still, I have friends from many different stages of life, but the friends that I made in kindergarten, that core group is still one of my, core groups. We still, see each other, at least once a month. We'll have dinner, and we're on the group chat, and it's very, as you get older, I turned 40 this year. Those friends, one of my friends says, you don't call them old friends, you call them friends of long standing. And so those friends of long standing are so powerful. It's such a beautiful and powerful thing to have friends that we've now known each other for 35 years. And, despite everyone's, success or lack of success, ups, downs, different stages, going through anything, people that know you from that earliest stage can call you out on your bullshit. And are really there for you through thick and thin, and so it's one of the joys of my life that I still have these friendships for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I agree. I grew up in this very cultural neighborhood as well. The core reason I was very curious to interview is because I grew up in Northern Virginia, so not far from DC, and I've known these friends for probably 15 years at this point. It's just like most of my life, which has been awesome. I think it's like the core thing, no matter what city I'm in or what place, like you gotta have the group chat going, which is fun. But sweet, so you're doing this. What else did little Jonathan get excited about?
I was always very interested in technology.
Huh. Why? I guess your parents were in textile business.
My parents were textile. I just thought it was interesting and cool. I think like the innovation aspect of like, I was always so curious about how with each new technological advancement, a whole world would be created.
What was the core thing when you were in high school that was like, wow, this is really big online?
Well, for us, it was like the original internet. I grew up when I was in high school, there was no social media, thank God. I was blessed that I didn't have to go through high school social media, but it was, it was the Napster, LimeWire, AIM group chat days. And then it was, seeing, obviously the PC revolution and the whole world that was created out of that. And then pretty soon it was how technology disrupted entertainment and music. At the time, I was very interested in music and entertainment. I think originally thought I would probably go into some world between music and technology. I ended up in a world between food and technology, which took obviously a little bit different path. But you've seen that. I've continued to see that pattern, and we're going through like probably the biggest version of that right now with AI, of how with each introduction of these transformational technologies, whether it was mobile, 15 years ago, mobile and cloud, like all of a sudden everything, the whole world kind of gets recreated around that.
Spice recently, right? Was that the company?
That was about 4 years ago. Yeah.
Nice. Well, sweet. So you're 60 now. You've made a fair bit of money. You didn't keep the money, but why do you think you're interested in music? And why did this fizzle off? I think that's kind of core to LA, music and entertainment, which kind of makes sense why you're interested. But why did that fizzle off? And Is that still part of your life now? Where did that go?
Yeah, so for me, I think, music's just this universal language. And for me, it just brought so much joy. It always takes you back to that time where you like fell in love with the song. I went the other week to the Oasis concert. And just like the memories that it brought back to be there listening to Oasis, this band that I was obsessed with in high school. And music did actually, we brought that along with us when we started Sweetgreen. For many years, we would host a big music festival.
Really? What was it
So
called?
it was called the Sweet Life Festival.
Interesting.
And if you grew up in Northern Virginia, I don't know if you remember it, it was at Merriweather Post Pavilion. We started in 2010, and it started off as a little block party just to promote our restaurants that kind of grew and grew and grew. And the next thing you know, it was 25,000 people at Merriweather Post Pavilion. It was almost a business in and of itself. And I think that was a product of something that myself, my co-founders all loved, but a way to make it more than just a restaurant. A way to connect with people on a cultural and lifestyle level. And, music has continued to play a role. It still has, a big role in the brand in terms of the people we partner with, the music that we curate in restaurants. Again, it's just part of the broader lifestyle that we're trying to create around Sweetgreen.
Did you want to go to Georgetown, or what's the story there?
I didn't really know what I wanted at the time. I think I knew I wanted to get out of LA and kind of get out of the bubble. And Georgetown was one of the better, probably one of the better schools I got into. I went and visited, although I visited during Easter, so the school was empty, but I saw this beautiful campus, I saw a beautiful city, and I liked that it was in a city, but a campus within still a city to get out in. And I'm like, this sounds great. And I just jumped in and I showed up.
What did you apply to study?
Business. I studied. I was in the
right?
What's that?
Is the McDonough School?
McDonough School of Business.
Nice.
Yeah.
Interesting. Bring yourself back to that moment. Touch on the moment when you entered college and it was kind of your first day, first week, and you kind of left LA. What did you feel?
I think I got exactly what I was asking for, in the fact that I wanted to get out of this bubble that I felt like I was living in LA.
Mm-hmm. Why do you say that?
It just felt like there was a homogeneity to the community. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go see just the world from a different angle, see different types of people. It was very, there's a lot of Persian Jews here, which I love my community, but I wanted to kind of get out of that.
What experience did you have that made you realize that you were in a bubble? I think for funny contrast, most people in SF don't realize, or maybe they do, but they don't fully realize they're in this little tech bubble. Not that it's bad or good, that's a different argument. But what did you do that made you realize, like, okay, I'm actually in this bubble and I have to leave it, or I want to leave it?
I don't know, it was, I guess, very obvious from a very early age. And I think the people that I looked up to at that time, I remember seeing as people that went and had these diverse experiences and had ventured out and got uncomfortable and didn't just stay in that comfortable place. So I've always tried to do that in different moments of life, kind of pushing out and putting myself in an uncomfortable situation. And it's those moments, those uncomfortable moments where I think you really grow. And I think, when I got to Georgetown, I went from, I probably looked like an LA kid wearing like Chuck Taylors and skateboarding and the whole kind of look and vibe of what I was into. And I got there and it was a totally different culture. I all of a sudden was kind of like the odd man out at that school and felt like more of an outsider to the culture.
Was that what you wanted? Were you like, this is bad, or you were kind of, this is good?
It was cool. Like, it was uncomfortable, but I liked it. I liked it because it forced me to forge my own path. It wasn't like I felt like if I was staying here, my path was set for me. Everyone kind of ends up doing a lot of the same things. They never leave. And I wanted to kind of frontier away from the basic, the classic path, which is nothing wrong with it, but I wanted, I guess I'm an adventure adrenaline junkie a little bit, and so I wanted to kind of get out and explore.
To touch more on that, what have you done that's kind of pushed that adrenaline junkie?
Well, I just noticed that the things that I love, whether it be surfing or other sorts of adrenaline sports, I don't do much of it these days, but I used to love to do bungee jumping or skydiving or all those sorts of things where you just really feel. And you have to be so present in the moment. Today, for me, that's surfing usually, where I can totally get out of my head and be in flow. I think maybe I have a decent appetite for risk.
Yeah, I went skydiving for the first time 2 weeks ago. I was strapped to the guy jumping out the plane, and he was like, "This is the most beautiful experience because in this moment you jump out, your mind's gonna forget everything. You're just like, this is the only thing you're gonna focus on. Because if you don't, you're gonna die. Like, you have me, but if you're by yourself, you're dead." I was like, "This is interesting. It was the best experience ever."
That flow state is
was
amazing.
amazing.
It's such a cool experience.
Have you like done the training and stuff? I think you said 25 jumps for like the
No.
Class A.
I've done it maybe 7 or 8 times.
Okay, nice. Yeah, it was amazing.
Bungee jumping is way scarier
Really?
because you have no one attached to you,
Oh,
and you can see the ground. Skydiving is like almost so surreal.
Is that base bungee and base are different, right?
Different, yeah. Bungee was with the cord.
Yeah.
So I did a semester abroad in Australia while I was at school.
In Sydney?
In Sydney, yeah.
Nice.
And that was an amazing experience for me. And in that, I did a lot of those extreme sports, and the bungee was definitely the scariest one.
That's awesome. Who'd you go abroad with? Are you still friends with them? Or?
Yeah, I made a
Nice.
lot of friends there. I went with one of my childhood friends who went to a different university. We both went and lived together. We did our junior year there. And that was, again, a really formative experience for me. It was, I went there, didn't actually focus too much on school, more on life. I was lucky between my AP classes and the course load I took while I was at school. I was pretty far ahead, so I could take a very light load while I was at school and really focus more on life experiences. And so we traveled, got a car, we traveled all of Australia. That's where I got really into surfing. I spent a lot of the time just reading. I never read a lot of the classic books, and so that time I'm like, if I'm not going to go to school, I'm going to try to read like a book a week.
Interesting.
And
Wow.
so I read a lot
That's
of
a lot.
books, and I felt like I learned so much. And it was actually a lot of the inspiration for Sweetgreen actually happened while I was there.
How do you say that, or why?
When I was in Australia, what I noticed was there was a cafe culture, which still exists today, and they've actually brought it here to the U.S., where it was healthy food, but with a really cool vibe. And in the U.S. at the time, you have to go back to 2006, almost 20 years ago, healthy food wasn't cool. And in Australia, it was. Like, you went to like the coolest cafe, they were serving bowls and seasonal ingredients and all of those things, but it's where the cool kids went. It's where they roll up in their skateboard and hang out at this cafe and have a flat white and do the whole thing. And I remember being like, that's so interesting. Like why does healthy food have to be so prescriptive and clinical and boring? In the US, it was eat your broccoli versus like, come here because this is where like the cool, sexy people hang out. And so that was a huge inspiration for then when I got back, when we started building Sweetgreen. The original name for Sweetgreens, we were actually going to call it Greens. And there was a cafe in Australia that was called Greens Cafe that we loved. It was totally different. It wasn't a salad concept or anything, but it was just a place we loved. And so we originally had called it Greens Cafe. Obviously, huge trademark issues with that.
What else did you do in Georgetown? Were you in a frat, or like did you go out?
Classic university experience. I had a lot of fun. I think I actually did learn a lot. I think a lot of people say, I don't know what university is like these days, but I do think I got a lot of good skills for starting a business. I think I knew what I wanted to do. So I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I took a lot of classes around how to become an entrepreneur, whether they were actually the entrepreneurship classes or the finance classes, on how to build a discounted cash flow, how to think about ROI. It's like simple mental models around once you're ready to start a business and raise capital and invest capital and be a capital allocator. I actually think I got a really good training for that while I was there.
Did you have any internships or like freshman, sophomore, junior year?
I did, yeah. I had internships every year. I have different kinds. 1 year I worked for a music agency. 1 year I worked at a real estate mortgage lender. 1 year I worked for another real estate developer, and then by the end we were starting to build our own business.
If you hadn't had started Sweetgreen, what did you plan to enter when you were graduating? You were 22, 23.
I think the idea was to go get a little bit more experience, and we can talk about it. I actually did take a job after college.
Yeah, talk about that.
So senior year, at the time, I don't know what it's like these days, but companies would come recruit.
It's still constant.
And so they come recruit starting in like September, like right when you beginning of the year. And we started thinking about Sweetgreen in the fall of senior year, but at the same time we were recruiting. So I went to the recruiting meetings, I applied, And I got a job at Bain & Company to be a management consultant. And I thought that was a great way to like cut my teeth and get this experience about thinking about businesses and helping businesses on business strategy. Really understand that consultants don't really do that, especially as an entry-level consultant. But I ended up accepting the job. You know, you get a little, you get your, whatever signing bonus. It was probably October by the time that happened, and then I almost forgot about it. And we went and started Sweetgreen. We wrote the business plan, we raised some money for it, and we went along starting to build it. Our goal was to build it, was to open by April.
Okay. When did you eventually end up opening?
August 1st.
Okay.
So like many restaurants, over budget and delayed. But come October, November, it was time to report back to work. So So I ended up actually going to work. I remember calling my parents. I'm like, I really don't think I should do this. I have this business, and having a conversation with my co-founders. And at the time, it was one tiny restaurant. It was a 500 square foot restaurant. It could barely fit the three of us in there. So we decided that why don't I go take that, and originally when we thought about Sweetgreen, it wasn't going to be our life's work. Originally, we were going to open one restaurant for fun. It was going to be a fun project. We were going to hire a manager, run the restaurant, and kind of go on with our lives. We ended up opening the restaurant, ends up being pretty successful right away. But I go take this job, and immediately I'm pretty miserable because I have this thing that I love, that I'm the boss, and I'm like, get to be creative and making real decisions, and all of a sudden, I'm kind of like building PowerPoint decks and Excel models. And so I didn't last there a whole bunch of time. I was doing double duty almost every weekend, flying back, on the phone the whole time, trying to help manage.
Is that based in New York?
I was in Boston for a little bit and then in New York. But after about 9 months, I remember I had an amazing conversation with one of the partners who actually I'm still in touch with. His name was Tom Springer. And I was telling him what I was thinking about, and he's like, listen, he helped me think about risk in a really interesting way. Because he told me that, he's like, I always had these dreams for him it was to be a musician. Like my dream was to be a musician. And I always wanted to do it. And I always said maybe next year, maybe next year, maybe next year. But then I had kids, I got a wife, I had kids, I had a mortgage. And now I can't take that risk. I have to wait till my kids are like in college till I can go do that. Full story, he's now finally. Oh really? I talked to him like last year, and he's like, I finally went. And
what does he do now?
I think he's focusing on his music now. But became a partner and did really well.
Is this like a record agency? Or he's a musician.
He's a musician, yeah.
Oh no way.
And so for me, I just remember being like, okay, like in a weird way, your risk is lowest at that time. I actually think that's why you see some of the people that do some of the craziest things start when they're, right in college or right out of college, because there's a saying, you can't fall from the floor.
Yeah, I also think it's a function of naivete. You don't really know.
Total
what you're
naivete. That was, my
you
whole
do
story was naivete. We didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't know how hard it was, but when we thought about starting a business, we didn't have to think like we already had no income. So like. We already were used to living, three of us in a little apartment, living off of, almost, like $2,000 a month. We had to like fund our whole life. And so starting a company and not being paid didn't matter. It was like an easy thing to do. It didn't feel risky. I think about that today with, my family, my life, and I have friends that have like started their entrepreneurship journey at this age. And I find that so much more courageous, honestly. Yeah. Because it's not just you. You're supporting you have dependents that you're supporting, and so that was a really. I just remember leaving Bain, making the decision to leave almost about 9 months to a year after I began, and moving back to DC, and that's when we decided we were going to continue to open more restaurants and really just make that my life.
I want to spend 10 minutes on this like early Sweetgreen story. There is a lot of documentation. Okay, you came back from Australia, you saw there was like no healthy food, started the store, you put together this deck, you raised money, etc. Right before the store launch, I think you lost your laptop or something. So all these stories go like really deep in that first moment. I think there's a moment in time where you realize that you want to start a company, or like you actually want to create something. Most people have this idea and you're like, this is cool, and you don't do it. Touch on that moment when you and your co-founders thought, okay, we're gonna try this project and create something. And in as much detail as possible, talk about that story. how you fundraised, who you fundraised from. I think there's the founder of Honest Tea, or co-founders, I think Family Had Restaurants or something. There's a lot of fun stories there. And if you're willing to err on the side of stories that most people don't know, and maybe try to relate to college students right now, if you're trying to start a company and there's just like whole world, you have no clue what the fuck you're doing, what do you actually do, and then where was your head at?
Sure. So, I was always very interested in starting business, as I've talked about. In junior year of high school, there was a couple businesses that I tried to start. So one, and neither actually fully got off the ground, but they were, months and months of business, writing business plans, pressure testing them. The first one was it was a bike sharing company. Again, remember, it was 20 years ago. I'd gone to Copenhagen and saw the bike sharing that they have. I don't know if you've been there and seen what they have. This is before city bikes and before Lime bikes and bird scooters and all of that. And we're like, oh, why don't we have this? Sounds amazing. Like, why can't we have a bike sharing? So went deep into learning about bike sharing, realized that, as was kind of proven, not really a profitable model. City bikes kind of funded, government funded. So great idea, great public service, but ended up not getting off the ground. The other idea I had, sometimes I actually wonder if someone's done it, was the idea was to be like a Google ad marketplace for physical ad inventory.
So like billboards.
It was actually meant to be originally the way in. Eventually, it was the goal was to be for anything, but the niche we were focused on was inventory that you wouldn't typically think of selling as an ad. So think the urinal, the sign above a urinal. Think like you have a building that's not just a side of a building.
Why did this work? That's pretty interesting.
I don't know. I just decided didn't feel like that was going to be my life's work, but I spent a lot of time on that.
Smart. What are some other novel, I guess, like top of the urinal side of a building? Like, what are other stuff? Some
people have now done this. Imagine like coffee, you're a coffee company and you want to sell like your sleeve, like the coffee sleeves. And people have done it on their cars. Like imagine anything that could, has eyeballs that could be turned into an advertising
This
unit.
was just you, or you had friends doing
this? No, this is just me at the time. And this is actually what I did I took an entrepreneurship class. Interestingly, you weren't allowed to do it on a restaurant company, or I probably would have done it for I would have done, Sweetgreen. So this was kind of the idea that I focused on for my senior thesis. But getting to the start of Sweetgreen. So we get back from Australia summer of 2006. Get back, start thinking about what we're going to do with our lives. Get to school the beginning of the year.
What year is this?
Now it's fall of 2006.
Okay.
It was honestly just this complaint that we kept having. We were going all the way back to freshman year. One of the ways where my co-founder Nick bonded was we were both foodies, and we got to school and the cafeteria was terrible. It was just really, really awful. And we were like, how do people eat this every day? Let's go out and explore. And we realized that in our tuition was a prepaid meal plan, but you could go and return it. So we figured out this loophole that you could go and give back your unlimited meal plan and be like, I'm only going to eat at the meal, at the cafeteria once a week or twice a week instead of unlimited.
They give you the money back.
And they'd give you the money back. And so I remember doing this. We did it together, and we're going to take that money and we'll just go eat out instead. And that's how Nick and I bonded. So we always had a love for food. And I think, coming back from Australia, myself and two of my co-founders, we all shared a similar story in that all of our parents were immigrants here and we're all entrepreneurs. And at the time, there was actually a fourth partner, which we'll talk about. Maybe that'll be your untold story.
Yeah, talk about that.
We were the three guys that would kind of talk about business ideas all the time. And then there was just this one around, couldn't find a place to eat that was healthy. It was why is there not a single place? There was, at the time, it was Dean and DeLuca. I don't know if you even remember what that was. It's like a high-end grocery where you could go get salads and sushi and things like that, but it was very expensive. There was Subway.
Wow.
It was the time where Chipotle was kind of taking off, but there wasn't a place to get convenient, accessible, delicious, healthy food. And so at the time, for us, we're like, this sounds really easy. Like, how hard could it be? You go buy a bunch of kitchen equipment, you go buy a bunch of food. We decided we were like, we can do salads because it doesn't take much like cooking. It's like, it should be operationally super simple.
There were no salad stores? There was nothing?
There was nothing.
Wow.
There was not a single salad shop. Like this whole, like what we see is like bowls and salads outside of Chipotle. There really wasn't this industry of fast casual, didn't really exist. It was really just Chipotle, and Chipotle had just gone public. So I actually spent, at school you have to oftentimes pick a company to study for different aspects.
Chipotle?
And so I decided to do Chipotle for like 3 different classes. I did like my operations class on Chipotle. So I learned kind of how they ran their line and the focus on throughput and, all of that. There was an investments class that I focused on Chipotle, and then there was like another strategy class. So I really got like a deep dive on Chipotle at the time. And again, because it had just gone public, there was all this information on it. And so that was kind of the spark of the idea is we want this in our own life. I'm sure we started talking to friends. They all wanted it. Like everyone is like, if that was here, it would be great. And so we started looking, we started writing a business plan. Nights and weekends, the 4 of us at the time were writing this plan. And by Thanksgiving, we had completed a business plan. And we thought at the time we probably needed like $100,000 to raise. And so we went home, and the goal was everyone's going to start talking to friends and trying to raise the money. Lo and behold, it was going to cost a lot more. It ended up being $300,000. So still for us today, I wish I could open restaurants for $300,000. It's significantly more than that today.
Did you spend all the $300K, or that was?
We did. We actually ended up spending more than that and ended up owing the contractor money at the end, which we had to pay off over many years. So it was really some really interesting learnings. But going back, I just remember a few interesting moments. One being, I'm so happy that one of my co-founders, Nick, originally there was a 4th co-founder, and Nick and him were roommates and best friends. And while that 4th co-founder is no longer with us and ended up leaving before we opened the restaurant, I'm so grateful that because of him, Nick came here. And the three of us were very lucky in that we were good friends with shared values and a shared vision, but totally different skill sets, and kind of see the world in, some ways very similar, but have like totally different.
How would you have bucketed the 3 of you? And I guess the 4th guy left before the first store started. Why did he leave?
I think for him it was really when he realized what it was going to take, that it was an all-in. He didn't really want to do it. I think his dad didn't really want him to do it. His dad is like, you should go take, his dad actually was very successful at the time, still is incredibly successful. And his dad is like, you went to Georgetown. We all got the same feedback. You went to Georgetown not to go open this like salad shop. Like, I want you to go work at Goldman and like go on and, be like an executive somewhere. And so, he told us, before we opened the first restaurant that he was going to part ways, and everything was fine and amicable.
What was it like when you opened the first store and people walk through the door and you serve them this food, they check out? Touch on the little intricacies there. And I guess the learnings from Chipotle, you learn about the throughput, financials, whatever. How do you try to apply this to Sweetgreen? Okay, people are going to walk in, I'm going to do this, you do this, we check them out, they walk that way. How do you think through all that?
Well, I guess I'll go back a little bit. When we first started, before we even had like a real business plan, we started looking for real estate. Like, okay, let's go find a spot. And so we literally, our way of doing it was like looking for lease signs and empty storefronts. We didn't even like call a broker. We knew nothing. And I remember one of our first meetings was there was this one landlord, still a large landlord that we're close with in the DC area. His name is Anthony Lanier, and the woman who was working him her name was Marcy Connolly. I always remember these two. And I remember calling Marcy and setting up a meeting. And I remember we showed up to the meeting. We literally put on like suits, so we would be taken seriously. And we go to this meeting and we're like, hey, we want to start, a restaurant. And she like took a liking to us, but she's like, is this a school project? Like, this is like a joke? We're like, no, like this is serious. Like, this is a real thing that we want to do.
You didn't have the money at this point, right?
We didn't have the money. Okay. We didn't have to write the business plan. We just went straight to the real estate. And she was the one that's like, okay, like, it sounds like a really interesting idea that the neighborhood could use, but you need to get your shit together. Like, go write a business plan, show me you have some funding, find an architect. She introduced us to an architect who actually ended up using, and that was kind of the catalyst for getting the business plan off the ground.
Huh.
So we then went and started asking for money. Someone once told me, I don't know why they call it fundraising. There's no fun in it. But we actually found it kind of fun. And I think what we found it fun is it helped us sharpen the business. You know, by having to sell it over and over and over again and be told no over and over and over again, we had to continue to like tweak it to figure out, you know, that it was like market feedback.
What ended up working?
I think there was a few things that people really liked. First of all, I realized that people were investing in people. So the people who ended up giving us money were like, I'm investing in you because, you know, there were like previous bosses of internships that knew our work ethic, or they're, you know, kind of friends, or even a professor that like knew us. So again,
Did the professor invest?
The professor did invest. Yeah, it was the entrepreneurship professor.
Oh my God.
He invested and he continued to invest, and he's still a good friend. Yeah, he's a great guy. His name is Will Finnerty.
Will Finnerty. Wow.
Not only did he invest, he got his family to invest. He's an amazing guy. And if you're watching this, Will, say hello.
He still works at Georgetown?
He was an adjunct professor. He's still, I'm not sure if he still does it anymore, but he still lives in DC. I see him every so often.
I'm going to email this to him and be like, hey, Jonathan said this.
No, it was amazing. He was a huge inspiration for us. I remember one of the books he had us read was the Keith Ferrazzi book, Never Eat Alone. And the thing was kind of like about cold calling, like just call your heroes, get advice. And I remember one of the things that someone told us is, ask for money to get advice, ask for advice to get money. And it was kind of like, that's how we approached it. It was going to people and being really open to feedback and knowing that we knew nothing and wanting to get people that not just would invest in us, but that could also help us and be mentors and advise us.
Were your parents supportive?
My parents were supportive, and I give them a lot of credit. There was moments where they're like, why are you doing this? They definitely voiced some of that. You know, it was like immigrant parents came to the US and they're like, why aren't you going to business school, law school, like get into real estate, you know, like the whole thing. What I give my parents and my dad a lot of credit is they realized that even in failure, it would be an awesome experience. Like even if it didn't work, it would be just a great experience, and you could always go back to getting a job at one of those big companies or going into real estate or doing any of those other things. So I give them a lot of credit, but the fundraising process was, we had to talk to a lot of people, a lot of no's. I remember going to banks early, and the banks are like, absolutely not. Like, are you out of your mind? Like, that was a hell no. We didn't even approach VCs at the time because that wasn't even like something VCs would do, is invest in restaurants. So we ended up probably talking to hundreds of people to get 50 people to invest. And again, we raised $300,000. So that's it's like $6,000 average check. Our biggest check was 20 grand. Mm-hmm. So it was literally the biggest check was a college friend's parents. It was like ended up being a lot of like our friends from college and like their parents.
Wow, that's awesome.
And yeah, it was some college friends. Like we had people that gave us like $2,000.
Yeah.
You know, I remember Nick met someone on a flight that he like made friends with that gave us like a few $1,000s. It was literally like anyone. It was like I joke. It was like Kickstarter before Kickstarter existed. But it was a really good way to sharpen the business plan and make us realize that like we had to be all in to do this.
Touch on these different points of naivete, right? You start the store and it was a project you didn't think it would grow this big. Eventually it did, obviously. Then when's the next point of naivete? Is the next fundraise? Is it when you realize you have to figure out the supply chain and you tackle this? Where do you start realizing that there's just things you don't know and you have to figure it out somehow? And then you eventually figure it out, but where are these different points? Like it's been a really good through line.
I mean, there's a lot of moments. I think with the supply chain was an interesting one because we figured you kind of go directly to farmers. We just didn't really know any other. We're like, where do you buy food? You probably call the suppliers, and realize there's a whole distribution. You don't actually call you don't actually call the farmers. You call the distributors, and so, I remember going to the distributor and be like, well, we don't want your just your average products. We want these specific ones. And they're like, well, that's interesting. We don't do that for anyone. Like we want local products. We thought that was a differentiator. And they're like, we don't do that either, but maybe we can develop that for you. And it's interesting, that company, Keeney Produce, actually ended up being one of our early distribution partners, still is a distribution partner for us today.
Are they nationwide or somewhere?
They do the whole Mid-Atlantic area for us. We're pretty large. They probably support, I don't know, 60 or 70 stores for us.
You have 250, 300 now?
We'll end the year with 290,
Nice.
almost
That's
or
awesome.
about 290, yeah.
Huh.
So that was one. I think, oh man, so many. Designing a restaurant, you know, and what goes into the flow of a restaurant. I think one of the early learnings was the power of simplicity and the power of constraint. So when we first started looking at spaces, we looked at one really big space. It was like 3,000 square feet. It was too scary of like how much that was going to cost, and so we ended up on a 500 square foot space. Coincidentally, that space was literally across the street from where we were living, and it was a historic old hamburger shop. So it was 560 square feet.
They went out of business? Or?
It was empty for a while
God,
at this
wow.
point. So it was a chain of slider restaurants called the Little Tavern. They actually had maybe dozens of them in the area, and they all looked the same. There was this like white and green taverns called the Little Tavern.
Is that why you do the white and green for Sweetgreen?
No, coincidentally, it like matched the where we were going from a design perspective almost like perfectly, and so like people think like that was just like that, and still looks like that. We weren't allowed to touch it. We weren't allowed to do anything around the outside of it, but it was such an iconic little space. But we learned the power of constraint, because originally, remember, the idea was healthy. It wasn't even salad. It was healthy fast food. But then when we were doing the first menu, we're like, maybe we'll do sandwiches, and we'll do smoothies, and we'll do breakfast, and we'll do all these things. And then we got this tiny space, and we're like, we can't do all that stuff. We have to do one thing and do it really well. And we started looking around the rest of the industry, and we realized the best in the business,
Just do one thing.
Chick-fil-A, In-N-Out.
What's the chicken finger place?
Raising Cane's.
Yes.
They get really, really good at perfecting one thing. And I think that was, again, kind of lucky in that the constraint forced us to focus on this singular thing and be the best in the world at our niche.
I told a friend this is super random. I have this friend named Barry Sabin. He is an investor at this random firm, and I told him I'm going to interview Jonathan. He said, I eat Sweetgreen all the time, and you have to tell Jonathan that the portion sizes on the Harvest Bowl are phenomenal. I was like, I promise I'll tell him that. So here we go. I'm going to clip it and I'm going to send it to him.
Thank you. We love the Harvest Bowl is our best seller.
Is it really?
Yeah, that's our best selling item.
Thank you to Barry. He probably makes up 10% of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of love. There's a lot of love for that. There's a lot of love for the Harvest Bowl.
I'm really curious, when you walk in a restaurant now, what sticks out to you? Like I, having not started a restaurant, obviously, I hate when the chairs, when you pull them out, they make noise.
Yeah.
I hate it. I don't like the color schemes don't match. I just kind of think through that lens. When you walk in a restaurant, what do you look at? What do you think through, and what makes for a good experience in a restaurant?
For Sweetgreen?
I guess anybody. I guess you have this lens of this world where you've built this physical location.
Yeah.
Design matters. The flow matters. The mission-driven nature of it matters. When you walk into a store, maybe Sweetgreen for sure, even just a restaurant, what goes through your head of this is good, this is bad, what really matters and what doesn't?
Yeah. So this is what we do. So I obsess over this, and I think the first, and this may sound squishy, is you can walk into a restaurant, and you can walk into any Sweetgreen. I spend about half my time in restaurants. It's a huge part of what I do.
In Sweetgreen restaurants?
In Sweetgreen restaurants. It's a huge part of, like, I think my job as a leader is being in restaurants, and I have a saying that my team has heard a million times, all the answers are in the restaurants. And the more time we can spend in the restaurants, the more time we invest. It's a way to invest in our culture. It's a way to sharpen our intuition. It's a way to really kind of check your work. There's so much we can do in here. We're designing restaurants, we're putting new menu items, we're thinking about marketing campaigns, but how does it show up for our team members and our customers? It all happens in the restaurant. So I spend a lot of time there. There's a few things that I do when I get in the restaurants. The most important thing is the team, by far. Coming off of a visit last week, I was in the Bay, and we visited restaurants that are 10 years old, and kind of facilities are a little aged and brand new.
Which stores in the Bay?
I actually went to almost every single one.
You must have went to the one on Chestnut?
I went to the one on Chestnut, the one on in the marina.
Yeah,
I love it.
right next to it. That's awesome.
Great energy. That sort of actually hit all the boxes.
Do you think it's because the demographic is like younger, higher,
Well, that too. Like the consumer's there, but I'm saying from what we control, it starts with the team and the culture. The most important role in this company is the head coach, which is our general manager. A great head coach creates a great culture, and creates an energy which is hospitable. You walk in, you feel welcomed into an experience, and they're proud of treating it like their own restaurant. And that's where everything else then kind of comes together. We have a saying here that the little things are the big things, and that's kind of what you're talking about. Yeah. I noticed beyond like trying to going in and first seeing the energy of the team, the smiles, the welcome, is it staffed, are the customers happy, is it flowing? Of course, I look at the design and all of those details, and there's a few things. For me, cleanliness is just absolutely critical, because it's one of those things that, if the restaurant is clean, it's a signal of caring, and the customers, they may not see the napkin on the floor, those little things add up for an overall impression.
Do you do this like the undercover boss thing? You walk in, nobody knows.
I do both. So sometimes I do unplanned, like unannounced visits, and oftentimes you do announced visits. Okay. When we do an announced visit, we have a very structured way of doing it. We do two things. One, we sit down with the leader, the head coach, and oftentimes, kind of the people they're developing. There's a huge focus on, talking, what are you proud of? Who are you developing as a leader? Who's going to be the next head coach? We have a goal of 100% internal promotion.
Oh, wow.
Last week I was visiting a store and I met this woman named Yuri. She joined us 5 years ago as a dishwasher, and she was just promoted to being a head coach. Head coaches make over $100,000 a year.
Do you call them head coach?
Yeah, we call them head coach. That's because their main job is developing future leaders and being a coach. So step one is like people. The second thing is what we call the sweet path. So we have a very structured way of walking the restaurant, and there's 13 zones that we walk through and have what we call not just like our non-negotiables within each zone.
Is that from a consumer's perspective or from the operational perspective?
Well, we start from a consumer's perspective, and then we do an operational perspective. So Sweet Path starts outside, and is your sign lit up? Do you have debris outside? Are you power washed outside? Is your outdoor furniture looking nice and clean? Are the tables wiped down? You go in, you walk the service line. We taste we taste everything on the service line. Do you have your cut sizes correctly? What was freshness is a huge part of what we do. So we look at, your chicken. How long ago was it put out?
You can track this through the app, right?
We could track it on the app, but everything that you cook has actually a day dot on it.
Okay.
So anytime you make chicken, you have a day dot. This was made at 11:30. We know exactly how long it should be sitting there. We look at the temperature.
Oh, wow.
We temp things. So, we have something called Rule 165. You don't want to have it below that because you don't want to under temp, but you don't want it above it because you're going to suck all the moisture out. So it's like these tiny little details that especially for us, because what people don't realize is Sweetgreen is a scratch cooking kitchen.
Mm-hmm. It's expensive.
We make everything from scratch. Like literally, we're making our dressings, we're marinating our chicken, we're cooking the steak to order. Like everything we do, we are making in that store. So it's not like we have a commissary that's standardizing everything and shipping it out in bags. So the precision of getting those things right from a food quality perspective is critical.
Is there, I assume there's a point in time, you're like, there's a way to make this more efficient, but then there's the trade-off of like, it tastes worse, and you deliberately tell yourself in the company, like, we have to do this at the cost of whatever it is, like, we have to do this. What was that point like? We're like, we can't, like, we're gonna make it in store, it's gonna be fresh.
We face those decisions every day, and I put out a mantra years ago, which was, there's companies that as they get bigger, they get better. Oftentimes tech companies can do that. The scale creates network effects, and the experience and the service actually improves. With food and restaurants, oftentimes it goes the other way. And you have to fight that inertia really, really, really hard. There's a fight for standardization. But have you seen the conversation recently about all these like AI companies that can get to $100 million in 6 months?
This high churn, it's terrible. It's not sticky.
And then some investors are like, I saw this conversation last week where it's like, well, those companies, if you could do it, if you get to $100 million in a year, that means a lot of other people could do it, and where's the moat? And sometimes there's a moat in the complexity of what we do, and that's a huge part of what we are building, is a regionalized supply chain, a scratch cooking kitchen, that we have the elements of a kind of a fine dining experience, but done in a fast food way. And if we can do that at scale with consistency, that's real like magic right there.
I recently interviewed one of the Palantir co-founders named Joe Lonsdale.
Oh, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, and he's like since started all these other complex companies. And the way he puts it is archaic industries, because he's done sort of Adapar as this other company, and he's done like policy stuff. and a venture firm, obviously. And he's like, if it's hard, you just have this massive moat, and he has this high pain tolerance. He just kind of goes towards it. Yeah. He's not done phenomenally well, obviously. That's interesting. When did you hit this point where you're like, okay, I have to integrate technology. That's a way to make this more efficient. And then touch on the process to getting to an IPO and what it felt like, and then your mindset of, okay, IPO onwards.
I think being so young when we started the business and being kind of digital native, we were always experimenting with how to leverage technology. So, just very early days, I remember, Twitter, I think, started in 2006 or something, and I remember, we were like, all right, we're gonna start a Twitter page. And at the time we had a mobile food truck was our, when we opened our second and third restaurant, we opened a truck also. And I remember we were like early days using Twitter to say, here's where we are, like we'd post the location. And so like from very early days, whether it was social media or other platforms, but we saw very early that when we started the business, August 2007, the iPhone didn't exist.
Oh, wow.
It's like crazy to think.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that.
Pretty soon after, obviously, the iPhone was, I think, released like within a month of 2 months of when we opened the restaurant. But very quickly saw that the world was going to radically change. And you were watching Amazon, make everything accessible within fingertips. And I just remember our biggest problem at the time was it was a good problem, we had lines. We had a handful of stores and we'd have lines out the block. We had a supply problem. But we had an issue where we had what we call we had a single engine, right? You had one front line, and we have a problem where our sales are quite peaky. So we have I don't want to say unlimited demand, but very practically unlimited demand in a very short period of time. And that demand does not extend. So if you can't fulfill that demand
you're just losing
between 12 and 1, 11:30 and 1:30, like those 2 hours, you're gonna lose it. Mm-hmm. So, typically it was a huge focus on throughput. How can you speed it up? But for us, I just remember being like, well, why can't someone just order on their phone? Like they can order a lot of other things.
Yeah.
And I remember everyone telling us, you're crazy, technology in restaurants don't work, nobody wants to do that, who would order food on their phone, food is meant to be in person, all of these things. I don't buy it. Every other retailer, we just saw this, the retail be totally transformed. And why wouldn't food why would the same thing not happen? And so we were one of the first companies to introduce digital ordering. We realized early, the power of data, that we introduced a digital wallet, digital loyalty and payment in 2009.
Do you treat this kind of like Starbucks where that it kind of acts like a bank as well?
Yes, but we don't get as much as much float as they do. Yeah. But yes, we do. It's really the data that's the most powerful, though.
What are you tracking that's the most useful?
It's just the direct marketing. It's our most effective marketing channel.
Really?
Because I can just email you, and eventually I send you a push notification. I don't have to spend marketing dollars to buy a billboard to tell you I have a new menu item. I just email you. It's as simple as that. And then of course, now you can personalize it and do all sorts of things with it. But it's a very basic level. It's that direct line of communication. But we saw the value in the data, and we saw the value in effectively doubling our sales at peak. Maybe the luck or foresight, we realized that the current restaurant was not going to allow it to happen. That you had a restaurant with a line, and we saw Chipotle, why couldn't they unlock this? Because they didn't build the restaurant for the digital experience. And we realized that you had to marry the digital and physical experience in a way where they worked together.
How do you do that? In my mind, if you say, I'm going to enter a store, there's a digital and physical experience. In my mind, the only thing that really matters for a digital experience is there's a shelf where they put the food, and I'm going to get the food. But how do you do it operationally? So you have 2 different lines to create the online orders? And
yes.
So
it sounds like today it sounds so commonplace, because post-COVID, every restaurant has a second make line, or most restaurants do. At the time, it was unheard of. It was unheard of to have a second production line. And we're if you want to do this properly, you have to build it for the digital experience. You have to put a second make line. You have to figure out the flow of the store, and you have to figure out a way to do pickup. Most people were doing pickup behind the counter, and you'd have to come in, you'd have to staff an extra person, so it wasn't profitable to do the digital pickup, because all of a sudden you have to have an extra person handing them the orders. We actually started doing the pickup the same way. The unlock was a store. Again, all the answers are in the restaurant. We were visiting a store that had very high digital, a lot of digital volume, and not a lot of space. And so they just took kind of like a shelving rack and they put it out there, and they just started putting orders out there because they had no space behind them. And then they noticed customers would just come in and grab their bowl, and were really happy. And everyone was afraid people are going to take other people's bowls. Like, how is that going to work? And we're like,
Just works.
this just works. And so we started doing it. I honestly think we were the first restaurant to put those shelves up.
Wow. Yeah, they're common everywhere.
And now
Everybody
like
has
everywhere has those shelves, but I'm pretty sure we were the first restaurant to put up those grab and go shelves. And now every restaurant, including us, design around them, alphabetize. And now we've gotten very, there's cubby systems, there's all kinds of ways to manage it. But it was very important to build, the restaurant to support that. So going forward, every restaurant we built was built that way. And then as things started to evolve with delivery, if you've seen some of our restaurants in San Francisco, you have a separate area for delivery drivers so they don't come inside of the kitchen. You've had to build a lot of throttling logic and a lot of orchestration on what order goes where, how do you prioritize the person here or the person there. And so there's a lot of now more complex things, but at its very simplest form, you have to redesign the restaurant to make it work for the digital world.
Have you heard of Roots? It's a similar kind of salad. No, I wouldn't say salad.
Yeah, they're in in Richmond.
Yeah. I think they got PE acquired. I only mentioned because the guy who started, Joe Linzen, went to my university, which I went to UVA before dropping out. And he was the first person I had spoken to who had started a company. And the coincidence somehow happened to me that we both had lived in the same dorm, although decades apart. And he was the first person to tell me that they implemented this app, and it was just life-changing. They could track every little thing, and then get data. And he was telling me there's some bifurcation of you can't get people's data unless they consent to it. Whereas they'll still give you their name and stuff when they type in for the order, but you can't actually take it unless they are
unless they consent, correct.
Yeah, it was very interesting to me that there's all these rules, and it was super interesting. What do you think you do best when it comes to this? I guess running a restaurant, to put it very, very plainly, what do you focus on from an operational perspective that's just way better than other people? What do you think people don't consider as much as they should?
I think for us, it's a really good question. I think for us, it's really about designing excellent experiences is the core of it. There's a lot of chatter Sweetgreen tech company. We are absolutely not a technology company. We use a lot of technology. But I wouldn't build it if I didn't need to. For us, the technology is an enabler to create an excellent experience. And what I think, it's just if it can make, we can make it more convenient and accessible, more personalized, awesome. So I think it's the marrying the art and the science is I think what we are best at is combining the science of the technology enablement of data, automation, et cetera, combined with the art of storytelling, exceptional sourcing, culinary excellence, and bringing those together and in a way that really, meets our customers where they are and delights them. One of our values is adding the sweet touch. We talk about our style being this, with everything we do, we want it to have this Sweetgreen wink. So,
what does that mean?
It's our play on something. A lot of our best things are a classic dish or a classic thing with a Sweetgreen wing. So it's just that it's our signature on something, whether it's how we design a store and work with a local artist and have that Easter egg quote somewhere, or using really interesting material, or if it's in the menu item and those interesting experiences that takes it from a boring commodity bowl to something uniquely Sweetgreen. Our job is being those experienced designers and bringing that quality food at scale. And that is, I think, something that really has never been done. And I think, what I've always thought about Sweetgreen as being is, well, on the front end, we're a food company, we're a restaurant company, so much of what, the mission behind it all is building healthier communities. And I think what keeps me going in a major way is the powerful impact we can have on people's lives. There's, so much of the health crisis we are in here in this country, it just starts with food and nutrition. It's the biggest leg of your health stool is food. And it's not people's fault. It's just there's an education issue. There's a desire issue of healthy food hasn't been made delicious and sexy and cool. There's an accessibility. And then lastly, there's a price issue. But that's what we want to be long term. Like long term, we want to solve for that and make, solve for desire, education, access, and then price, and really democratize this idea of eating healthy food.
What did it feel like the day you IPO'd? If you could sum it up in 20 to 30 seconds, and you kind of like have all this work that comes with this day that people celebrate, but then you have all this more work to do. What did you feel in maybe 20, 30 seconds?
It's an amazing moment. It's just this incredible thing because, it's such an emotional, you put so much blood, sweat, and tears. You remember all of the hard times, and you get to go to this place. The experience is very cool, walking the halls of the New York Stock Exchange and going and, you have your team there. We had our, many of our oldest employees that have been with us, both from in restaurants as well as the support center. Some of our oldest investors are good friends that have kind of seen the whole journey, and to be surrounded by all these people and just have a moment to like celebrate this milestone, but also recognize that it's just the beginning of the next chapter, and it is not an exit. It's a capital event to fund the future. It was a very proud moment. It was a very humbling moment. It's a lot of fun, but you're in like the temple of capitalism. and ringing that bell. I was lucky. I brought my son. He was just over 1 year old, and I brought him there. It was just such a special experience to have my family there, and seeing my parents and the pride in them, and having this moment with my co-founders of being like, man, 15 years of building to get to this point, but like this is pretty cool. But that's awesome. The next day, let's keep going.
Yeah. Touch on your wife. What is it like having her support you, and how does that change your work? I've heard people say when you have a wife, you have kids, it's amazing, but then you have to be much more efficient in the way you go about your work and your day-to-day life, and you have like kids that you love, and you have to take care of, spend time with your wife, and there's like this whole amazing thing that's going on, but then it makes your work much more efficient. Or there's stuff that you cut out, or what was it like actually having that chapter of your life start?
I remember, when we started the company, and for the first almost 10 years, everyone was in their like 20s. Like almost nobody in the company was married. There was like one person that was married and had kids. And we would work nonstop. Like no one left the office before 9 o'clock ever. Like I remember we'd leave the office and we couldn't find places to eat dinner because everything was closed in DC. Like we'd leave at like 9:30, like try to get to a restaurant by 10 p.m. for dinner. It was like, so I just remember being like, how in the world am I ever gonna have a relationship in this with where you're working, or kids, or any of those things? But I'm very lucky in finding the greatest partner ever in my wife, someone that I've actually known almost my whole life.
Really? When did you meet her?
She was pretty much when I was a kid. We grew up in the same community. We grew up in the same bubble.
Oh, wow.
But both had that same yearning to get out of the bubble. And so she was also an entrepreneur.
Where did she go to college?
She went to school in Boston at BU.
Oh, nice.
We ended up, so I knew her forever. We were friends. We were friends, but nothing romantic. Reconnected, it was about a decade ago. Wow. While we were both living in New York. And we were actually at a mutual, very close friend's wedding, and I just like had an epiphany, and I'm like, I just remember being like, I actually think you're my you're my person, and like I don't know why we should give this a shot, and if it doesn't work out, we could go back to being friends, but like we know each other, we know everything about each other, we like each other a lot. There's only one question left: is like, is the romantic part there?
Did you have to convince her, or she was like, I'm in?
And she thought I was crazy at first, but. We went on that first date, and we were engaged within less than 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, because we knew each other so well. Wow. And so I'm fortunate. She's incredibly supportive. She's brilliant. She challenges me. She holds me to a really high standard, but at the same time is very supportive, understands. Her father was an entrepreneur, a very successful entrepreneur, so she knows.
What did he do?
He was one of the founders of Qualcomm.
Nice.
So I learned a lot from him. Still learn a lot from him. He's an incredible man, and a great family. And and my wife has seen that, understands what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and is incredibly supportive. Has great intuition. So she'll tell me you should listen to me more. She's usually right, and so that's all true. But I feel very lucky to have found a great partner, And today I'm figured out how to balance my life. And I remember actually something I learned in that entrepreneurship class. One of the things that always stuck with me, he was called the House of Equilibrium, which was this idea where like there's 5 things in the house. I think it was like your family, your health, your career, like money, like one other thing. Like it was like all of the components of your life. And he's like, in different times of your life, one room in the house can be bigger than the other, but ultimately, if you don't get all 5 of these things, you're not going to be happy. Like you can have a big money and no health.
Yeah.
And like that's not going to be good. Or no family relationships. Like you really want to like figure out over time how to optimize for all of these things and find that equilibrium.
Do you think it's best to optimize for that by the time you're 50 or 60 or by the time you're 38? And when do you think the period is to make sure you've kind of optimized for everything?
I try to optimize it today, but I think it ebbs and flows. There's like years where it's like, all right, gotta grind and like can't be there as much. But even like throughout it, I don't think you could ever like totally sacrifice health or relationships for long, long periods of time because you'll end up not happy. And there's that Naval quote, like, if you're so smart, why aren't you happy? Yeah. And it's like,
it's true.
Like if one of our goals should be to be happy and fulfilled. And, there's this other like paradigm I always think about is, that helps you when you're comparing yourself to somebody else's life is, you look at a really successful entrepreneur and you're like, oh, I want that. But do you want the whole life? You have to be willing to trade the whole thing and of what they had to do that. And would you make that trade?
I think Elon mentioned this on a Lex Fridman podcast or something. It's like a lot of people want my life, the money, whatever, but you really don't.
He's the perfect example. Like I think a lot of us look at it like, oh my God, I want to do that. But do you?
Yeah.
Do you actually want to do it? I don't think a lot of people do. And so for me, I think I want to create an amazing business, but I want to do it for a really, really long time. And for me to do it for a really long time, I have to make it sustainable. And so going back to like me thinking I could never do this, I could never figure out how to balance family and kids, I've figured it out. Like, it means I wake up at 5 in the morning to wait, I have to wake up at 5 a.m. to meditate and work out before my kids are up, and like get some work in so I can, try to maybe take them to school and have a full day and, try to make it home for bedtime. Like, you got to like figure out how to sort it all. And, I'm in this period of life. I have 2 kids and 1 on the way. So I have a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and 1 due in January. And so like I'm in the moment of my life where I got to protect my health because otherwise I'll just not be good at anything. My both physical and mental. So I meditate every single day without fail. I have to stay healthy in terms of how I eat and exercise. I have to take care of my wife and my kids and my family, and I have to take care of my business. The one thing in this moment where like has the house that's shrunk is like my social life, right? I don't have, on weekends, especially since I travel a lot, like that's my time to be with my kids and my family and less time on the social, but eventually my kids will grow up and I'll have that time. But for me, it's like really, you gotta be so intentional with your time. I'm like, I think probably like most entrepreneurs like, and CEOs, like I am like crazy about my calendar and like strategically looking at it. Like I look at it like, every week, every day, every week I look at it like for the next day, for the next week, for the next 3 months. And like, what are my priorities? Am I spending time in the right places? And not making sure that I'm not letting my calendar run me, but I'm running my, I'm in control of my time to push things forward as I need to push forward.
That's awesome. We're coming up on 4 p.m. I want to ask you 2 questions, and let's keep them, I guess, to 30 seconds each. When were you unhappiest and when were you happiest?
I think happiness comes from, for me, there's 2 kind of drivers. There is this feeling of purpose and a feeling of progress. So I think when you have, you feel energized about a greater purpose and you're feeling like you're, again, like they say burnout isn't working too much. It's working without any results.
Yeah.
And so I think the times when I'm happiest sometimes are actually when I'm working hardest or maybe can feel most stressed, but it's those times when I feel like I am connected to a purpose and pushing things forward. So like I remember, there's some real transformational times for the company when, one of the stories we uncover is we ran the company as 3 CEOs, co-CEOs, for about a decade. And we decided, collectively it was time to divide and conquer and have one person be CEO, and they're different, each of them take different roles in the business. But in that time, there was a huge transformation that had to happen of the team that was built around the existing team we had, and so there was just a change in our capital. That we would change, raising money from new investors, a little bit of shift in the strategy, change in the team. But as stressful as it was, I felt a purpose and I felt like we were making progress. I think the times when you're unhappy is probably for me the most unhappy time was like parts of the time during COVID when you feel like you've lost control for things outside of your control. And our business was really severely impacted by COVID, and it went for a very long time. So that was probably one of the moments of most unhappiness. But I've learned to get to a place where I try to bottle it up as fuel and don't let these things make me unhappy. If I can't, it's a lot of reading Stoics books. Like,
it's probably a function of meditation.
If I can't do anything about it, if I'm unhappy about something, do something about it. If I can't do something about it, don't be so unhappy about it.